Welcome to another episode of African Mindset Series. Today, I just wanted to touch on a topic that I've been pondering for quite some time. It's this whole idea of voluntary migration out of Africa to the West, to the Arab world, to China, to basically anywhere. If you ask your average African youth, it looks like there's this notion that they cannot succeed in Africa. They will have to travel abroad in order to succeed. Who planted that idea in our heads? Who made us believe that the promised land is elsewhere? Those are the questions I want us to ponder on. And before I say anything, I want to put a disclaimer out there and say, yes, I know currently I myself live outside of Africa because my parents sent me here after secondary school. But I've remained connected to the continent, especially in recent years. And, have taken steps to invest. And I'm also looking forward to return so that I can contribute fully to the development and emancipation of Africa. Now, I just want us to ponder on this notion that one has to travel out of Africa in order to succeed. I find it very disturbing in many areas, and we'll discuss that. Whilst, I appreciate, why people want to better their lives. And therefore, sometimes, migration is as old as human beings. People always migrate to where they think is more prosperous and, to try and carve themselves a better life. But what I worry about is the mentality behind it. This idea that has been pumped into our heads to look negatively on Africa and to consider Africa as a place of dead dreams, as a place of sickness, disease, and poverty. Whilst in fact, the very nations that we run to actually depend on Africa to prop up their economies. That's how the world works. The manufactured poverty in Africa, and I call it manufactured because Africa is a land of abundance. The manufactured poverty in Africa is directly correlated to the wealth in the very countries that we run to, especially the Western world. And, China, all these countries depend on African natural resources, right? Or they exploit Africa in different ways. So I think, I'd like the youth to maybe take their future in their own hands and start questioning this notion that they need to travel out in order to make it. And I say this because a lot of the time people don't even explore what we have in Africa. And to a point, I blame the education system, because the education system is still the colonial education, which doesn't enable Africans to think about how to use the resources that we have around us in order to improve our own circumstances. We are trained to think that we simply need to learn book knowledge, which is not relevant to our resources. We are trained to think that we plant to feed Europe. Our natural resources is meant to be consumed by outsiders. Look at our gold, look at our diamonds. It's all exploited by foreign corporations. Yet, if the continent is to move forward, we need our education system to be relevant, so that when we have engineers coming out of our school, those engineers know how to exploit our own resources, transform our own resources, and turn this into industries that employs and benefit all Africans. So I worry about the brain drain because, look around you. There are more doctors more nurses, more African doctors, Ghanaian, Nigerian doctors precisely. There are more Ghanaian and Nigerian doctors in New York, in London, than in the whole of Ghana or in the whole of Nigeria. Why is that? Because our governments don't care about the health sector back home. They don't invest in it. They don't pay our doctors well enough. And at the same time, also, as I say, there's this inherent view that traveling abroad is the way to make it. Okay. And I'm not going to be one to say people shouldn't travel at all. But even if you travel, how about investing back home? How about going there to gather some capital and invest back home, give back home? You know, it worries me that we are always complaining about Chinese taking over, Lebanese taking over. What about Africans in the diaspora? How are we using our money? Do we spend our money investing in other economies, even going abroad to other countries on holidays without ever setting foot in Africa? Because every time you go on holidays, you are investing in that economy. You are paying for hotels, you are paying for food, you are paying for transport. That's investing in their economy. What about your own country? What about other parts of Africa? Africa is a vast continent. And yes, I understand the challenges. Our leaders need to make it easier for us to travel between African countries. But that notwithstanding, we need to take a stand. We need to decide that we are going to invest in our motherland. We need to take a stand that we are going to return and contribute to Africa's development. And we also, for those of the youth who are still in Africa thinking about traveling abroad, I'm besieging you to look around you and look at potentially what you can do, the resources you have in abundance. For example, land is very cheap in Ghana, in Nigeria. Land is cheap. You could easily buy a small piece of land and start, I don't know, snail farming, poultry farming. And another thing that I notice among the youth is they don't like to start small and grow big. They want to basically dive into money straight away. And that's not the way to do business. We have, despite all the neo-colonialism, the exploitation by Western corporations, and the damage they are doing in Africa, there's still so much resources and wealth that we ourselves can lay our hands on and transform and be well off for it, living in the continent, employing ourselves and employing other people. Farming is a sector that I think a lot of African youth need to look at. Like I say, I appreciate the fact that our education system does not equip us to exploit our resources, and that includes farming. Our education system frowns upon it. It's almost seen as a poor man's job, but it's not. Everybody needs to eat. Farming and agribusiness is one of the sectors that is likely to grow in the future, is likely to grow exponentially. But also, when you are farming, consider farming to feed Africa. There's the AFCTA, AFTA, yes, the African Free Trade, the African Continental, ACFTCA, the African Continental Free Trade Area, or whatever the acronym is. You know what I mean? We need to start taking advantage of it, in spite of sometimes the frustration and the blockages that our politicians put in the wheel. But at least they have instigated this process of pan-African trade among ourselves. The youth need to grasp hold of it. How about planting to feed Africa? I am not one to propose that you go into agribusiness just to plant to export to Europe. That's still the colonial model. Plant to feed Africa. Plant to transform locally. Plant to feed Ghana. Plant, and if you've got extra, export it to neighboring African countries. Export it to neighboring African countries before looking beyond Africa. We need to bring the change. Even if our politicians are not doing the right thing in our own little way, we need to make that change. And as for the rest of us who shop when in Africa, buy African, buy made in Ghana, buy made in Africa. This is how we develop Africa. And secondly, I always despair when I see politicians driving foreign cars as though that's a sign, a badge of confidence, or like I've arrived. Why would you spend your money buying foreign brands when you can actually invest in African brands, invest in developing industries in Africa? We are part of the problem. Our politicians are quick to jump on any opportunity to travel to Europe so they can send their whole family, so they can go Gucci bag shopping, designer shoe shopping. It's pathetic. Yeah, but the reality is the politicians come from our society. They are the product of our society. So we need to renew our mindset. We need to change, and we need to start valuing what we have, because we have a valuable continent. We have resources that can sustain us. Why is it that we all want to buy imported goods in Ghana? Why buy imported rice when there's local rice? Why do we have to import wooden products when we've got talented local artisans? Why is it that people take pride in saying, oh, I built my home using imported this, imported that? It's ignorance. It's ignorance and shallow-mindedness and lack of education that makes us think it's an honor, or it's a badge of honor to import things. So I'm asking us to rethink. It's the same mentality that leads us to leave African shore to go to Europe. And most Africans who go to Europe, the majority end up living in poverty. I'm sorry. They barely make it. They barely ever make it. So excuse me, I need to